Hello and welcome to the Mind Your Career webinar series. My name is Rachel Burkhan-Rammelfinger and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I am delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled National Fellowship Opportunities, Navigating the Research and Application Process. This webinar is part of our Young Alumni Career Development Series for early career professionals 10 years after graduation, but the tips and resources are useful to career growth for alumni of all ages and graduation years. I'm excited to welcome our speakers who are from the UChicago's College Center for Scholarly Advancement. They are Nicole Fazio, the founding director of the center, and Nick Morris, the assistant director for national scholarships and fellowships. Nicole shared with me that she helped to restore the Oxford home of C.S. Lewis, author of the Chronicles of Narnia, and subsequently ran a Scholars in Residence program at the house. She also shared that yes, there is a wardrobe. No, it does not lead to the lamppost, but she has seen the only map drawn by Lewis of Narnia. And when I asked Nick what job he aspired to in his childhood, he said he wanted to be a paleontologist until he discovered his aversion for dirt outweighed his enthusiasm for dinosaur bones. It's my pleasure to hand the controls over to the two of them.
Great, thanks so much again, Rachel, for having us, and we hope this is a beneficial and informative hour spent with all of you. We're delighted to be able to speak to alum because a lot of the opportunities that we actually support very much fit early career students, former students, and recent alums. So what we thought we'd do is provide just a quick overview of the kind of support that we provide, and then specifically attend to the opportunities that are most relevant to our recent alum, including Fulbright, a number of UK opportunities, as well as some China-focused postgraduate opportunities. Generally speaking, you'll see on our slide we have a different name than what Rachel has just said. We just recently transitioned our title to the College Center for Research and Fellowships, but we're going to speak exclusively to all of you today about the postgraduate fellowship opportunities. Our unit provides information as well as guidance about these national fellowships, and then very much are available to support current students and alum throughout the writing process and editorial process and preparation process for these types of awards, which are by their very nature nationally competitive. We do offer individual advising, and so that we don't forget to mention this, we're available by phone and Skype, and oftentimes, especially during the summer, spend a lot of time using phone and Skype to connect with students and alum. We do closely mentor students once they're into the application process. So again, we wouldn't want to be sharing all these great opportunities with you and not be available to support you in that effort. So very much think of Nick and I as a resource. We've also made sure to provide a couple of different ways to connect with us, but specifically also connect just generally with our resources. The website is really informative. So everything that we speak about today, you can find guidance and pages, links, deadlines, and ways to contact us about any of the opportunities that we speak about today. We provided a general email, and at the end of the presentation, we'll provide our individual emails as well. I would just recommend that you actually subscribe as well to our listserv. During the academic year, it goes out weekly. During the summer, it goes out maybe 3 times across the summer, and in that we include new opportunities, but also deadlines and information sessions, all of which are open to local alum. You're welcome to attend at any point during the year. So do subscribe if you want to stay up to date on deadlines for opportunities that might be relevant for each of you. So with that, I will move quickly through these. I guess I've already pretty much touched on the materials that we do provide and the support we provide. You can find, as I said, a comprehensive website there at ccrf.uchicago.edu. A searchable opportunities database, and then, as I mentioned, the listserv. Specifically, in terms of walking students through application processes, we will provide you as alum, just as we do our current students, with a kind of thorough conversation around the fit of the opportunity. One of the things we're really keen to do is make sure you're not spending time applying for things that don't fit you well and where you're at now and what you want to do going forward. So we do spend time in that kind of initial conversation, as well as application review and editorial support. We facilitate formal endorsement processes. Some of the awards we'll talk about today do require that, and we'll walk through those opportunities and what that endorsement looks like. We support national interview preparation, so if you are one of the fortunate students, and we have both students and alums successful at becoming national finalists who will support you through the interview preparation for those interviews. And then we do have an annual celebration of current students and alum every year, hosted by Dean Boyer. That is kind of a general overview of what we provide, and I'm going to hand it over now, I think, to Nick, who's going to get us started by talking through the Fulbright program, which in many cases fits the most number of students and recent alums. So we'll probably spend the most time talking about Fulbright.
So, in brief, Fulbright is a undertaking funded in part by an annual appropriation from Congress and facilitated through the State Department to increase mutual understanding and enhance cross-cultural communication. Pictured is Arkansas Senator J. William Fulbright, the namesake of the program. We have included here notable alumni who have won the Fulbright in one form or another. We'll spend most of our time today talking about the U.S. student program, though there are scholar grants, which I believe most everybody that we've noted here have won. So just peruse at your leisure. To increase mutual understanding and enhance cross-cultural communication, the Fulbright program awards about an equal number of grants to students from the United States to go out into one of 140 different countries worldwide, and then funds international students to come into the U.S. with the idea that everyone lives, teaches, learns, and works in their respective foreign countries, presents a good face for their home country while abroad, and then kind of comes back and acts as a local, comes back to their home country and acts as a local knowledge bank or resource for their community. The grants are overwhelmingly of two types, study and research and English teaching assistance, which we'll talk about today. The study and research grants run 9 to 11 months. This is all going to be kind of very context dependent on the country itself, but in general, they provide funding to pursue projects designed by the student or taken in collaboration with an existing in-country affiliate, and about 140 different countries are currently accepting proposals. The ETA, the English Teaching Assistantship Program, is encapsulated well by its name. You act as an in-class language learning resource, bringing the benefits of a native speaker to a classroom, working about 20 to 25 hours a week, without shouldering the full brunt of a teaching load, and spending about 10 hours a week as this sort of citizen ambassador engaged in what Fulbright terms a host country engagement, which is the formalization of Fulbright's mission, and basically puts you in a position to act as active transport between some particular aspect of American culture that you're passionate or very interested in, and a counterpoint in the host country culture that you are visiting. The application process the process itself is daunting. The materials you end up producing are rather succinct. There's a 2-page statement of grant purpose, and a 1-page or personal statement for study and research, and a 1-page statement of grant purpose and 1-page personal statement for the ETA. So you're talking about 2 or 3 pages of written material total. Then the entire thing is encapsulated in an Embark online application. Just as a brief kind of overview, that statement of grant purpose is going to be the who, what, where, when, and how of your time in country. And the personal statement is going to be kind of unpacking your motivation for a review committee to understand why this experience is going to make sense for you. The additional things that you will not, in fact, write yourself, but will need, you'll need 3 letters of recommendation. For the study and research, they're sort of more standard and attuned specifically to the research project you're proposing. For the ETA, they're a recommendation form that really kind of highlights the aspects and characteristics of grantees that Fulbright has kind of identified as necessary to being a sort of top-notch in-class resource. For study and research, you'll need what's called a letter of affiliation, which is a sort of letter on letterhead from the organization under which you'd be conducting your research project. Very frequently that's a university, but it could be an independent research body, nonprofit, think tank, community organization. And finally, you'll also need a language evaluation form, which is relatively light lifting and can be done by a previous instructor. So the application process itself, a bit daunting. We start in mid-April, and we've kind of designed our process to be, from the outset of kind of a lot of information to digest at the beginning, it's designed to be bite-sized thereafter. So in mid-April, we've got a Fulbright Primer, which really kind of breaks into component pieces the statement of grant purpose and helps orient the applicant to what Fulbright is going to be expecting of them. And it is absolutely just a kind of non-binding brainstorm activity to kind of help students applicants hit the ground running in terms of what they might be interested in. We have set up deadlines in early July for rough drafts, in late July for a draft of that Embark online application, which doubles as a good time to ask for letters of recommendation. Towards the end of August, we'll have a campus deadline, and then probably the week ultimately before the school year begins for us, so that's usually late September, we'll have campus interviews, which will effectively process the endorsement for the applicant through a university committee made up of faculty, staff, and sometimes advanced graduate students. And in early October, we'll have our final campus deadline. So that's Fulbright.
We're going to transition to some different awards, but I want to just take a moment to remind you that you're welcome to send in questions as we're talking about these different opportunities, and we'll try our best to address them at the end of our presentation. So the Fulbright is a very specific type of experience, as Nick mentioned, that lasts about 9 months. The next series of opportunities are really focused on graduate degrees. So these are different experiences that will functionally fund either a 1+1 2-year experience in the UK or a full 2-year master's degree. So I'm going to talk through them fairly quickly. They're very specific insofar as it's really important that you think carefully about whether or not a master's degree, say at Birmingham or Oxford, makes sense in light of what you're going to do or what you have done and are planning to do going forward. Very much, again, happy to take questions throughout and then at the end about these different opportunities. So we categorize a number of opportunities as the UK-Ireland National Awards, and as I said, these fund graduate degree programs in the UK and Ireland. The Rhodes is specifically to Oxford. It's probably the one that's most well known. And alumni still have the opportunity to apply to the Rhodes up to the age of 23 thereabouts, depending on your birth date. They're quite specific. And it is to fund 2 years of formal study at the graduate level at Oxford. They do also consider students who might be looking to do a second BA. That's a less common enterprise as it used to be in the earlier iteration of the Rhodes, but it is an option. The Marshall Scholarship similarly supports up to 2 years of formal postgraduate study. That unique thing about the Marshall is that it allows you to go to any institution in the UK and Northern Ireland, and also to combine 2 one-year experiences at 2 separate institutions. So if you're really looking to enhance the kind of professional development you've already had since graduating, or if you're looking to, let's say, do a couple of master's programs in advance of a JD or an MD or even a PhD, the Marshall and in fact the Rhodes offers an interesting way to do that, and a really compelling way actually for students to transition into a master's program in advance of a formal, let's say, doctoral program, or in fact will have the UK graduate programs be the extent of their formal advanced training. I will say that although these provide funding for 2 years, there is the option always to stay and continue your studies into a doctoral process if that's in fact what you wish to do. I have denoted with the asterisk that these require formal institutional endorsement. So what that means is even as alum, along with our undergraduate candidates, you're required to be formally supported by the university. So you can't apply directly to these programs. And so what we have done is created, like Nick has done for the Fulbright, a fairly formal process that begins in May, where you submit a campus application. The deadline is always in May, again, for alums and for current students. And that initiates a selection process by our faculty, from which we then move across the summer in a fairly aggressive way, working through all the drafts, all the materials that these opportunities require of the applicants, with the aim of getting everything in early October. So summer, in all cases, really with the opportunities we're talking to you about today, is the most important time, and in fact the busiest time of our work here in the office. So Rhodes Marshall, the third option is actually to Ireland in a one-year program called the Nichole Scholars Program. It was originally named to honor Senator George Mitchell. It had an original iteration as a peace and conflict studies program. It is much broader than that, but very much interested in students and scholars who are very outward looking, that they are thinking about the master's as a kind of opportunity to expand perhaps already their professional experiences, their public policy work or public service work. The key, I suppose, point of the Mitchell is to be able to articulate why you need to be in Ireland for the program and the way the program lies into your overall ambitions. The fourth of the really interesting and compelling programs for alum in the UK is the Gates Cambridge Scholarship. That one, unlike Mitchell and Rhodes and Marshall, does not require endorsement, but we're very glad to provide support across the summer to help you get ready for the Gates Cambridge. Again, another opportunity to fund full graduate study at the University of Cambridge exclusively. And in the case of, I would say, all of these, the foundations are looking not just for very strong intellectual engagement, but also individuals who are very outward looking, ambitious for others, have been engaged already in active either service or leadership or professional endeavors that suggest that there's big issues, big problems that are driving the choices that you are making. So that's the kind of UK contingent of opportunities that are available. As I said, for the endorsement required programs, we would need you to apply by May, so that process is already completed for this year. However, if you are thinking about going back to school, pursuing a UK degree, we would pick up that process with all of you starting formally in May, although I'm happy to talk with anyone in advance of that May campus deadline. You will always be applying the year before you would take up the award. So it's something to kind of always bear in mind with national fellowships, including Fulbright. If you were to apply this summer, you would be beginning your Fulbright experience about a year from now. There's another set of opportunities, fairly new actually, that are now focused on China and granting one-year master's degrees in China. I'll brush over them very quickly. The Schwarzman Scholars is perhaps one of the newest on the block that funds a full master's degree in a specific set of areas: business, international relations, economics, and public policy. And they are looking very much at individuals who can exhibit a potential, if not already, evidence of leadership, significant leadership. They are a global leadership program. They do not require endorsement, but again, another nationally competitive program, and we would be happy to offer support to any alum who are looking to pursue a master's degree at Tsinghua University in Beijing. The other program, almost on the kind of other side of the scale, is the Yenxing Scholars Program, which tends to focus more on the intellectual and cultural history of China as a place. So they are looking for individuals interested in China very much, China studies, its culture, its history. And students can in fact go on and pursue a PhD under the guise of the Yenxing Scholars Program. That does require campus endorsement. We have an October deadline for campus endorsement with a December national deadline, partly because we're an institutional partner on the Yenxing program. I suppose always I bear in mind that these are in fact one-year master's programs, which often makes them a little bit more intense than what you might encounter in the US. And again, especially with Schwarzman, they are looking for that leadership, evidence of leadership and potential for future leadership. I, unlike what Nick did with Fulbright, haven't provided you with all the application components because more or less, they're sort of similar, but they're also quite specific. And so at any point, if you want to talk about the different pieces that go into any of these, I'm happy to answer those questions. I will say there is always one document that you will be expected to produce, and that is a personal statement, which is a kind of 1,000 words or less essay about what you care about and why, and how that's directing the choices you are making going forward, as well as providing a way to reflect on some of the things that you did before you graduated from Chicago. So that is a document that you will encounter, for better or worse, in any of these kinds of processes. Finally, one last opportunity we wanted to share with you, because again, another way to consider being funded as an alumni into your graduate programs, the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program is in fact the newest major national award, in fact claiming to be the largest of its kind. Will fund any graduate degree or combination of graduate degrees at Stanford University. They will award 75 scholars this year. They awarded 50 last year with the aim to eventually award 100. So that could be a JD PhD, an MD, an MD and PH, whichever and however you can imagine using Stanford in light of the ambitions and goals you have. That is what the Knight-Hennessy was created for. You actually apply a little bit like Gates Cambridge in parallel with your University of Stanford application. So you should not apply to Knight-Hennessy until you're ready to also apply to Stanford for your graduate degree. The one caveat is they will not fund any one-year master's degrees, so you'll want to look and make sure you're identifying 2-year experiences. But it really is any degree, so JD, MD, PhD, MBA, Masters in Public Policy, and any other thing that Stanford has been able to conceive of, you can potentially propose as a graduate experience under the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program. There are 3 very specific criteria. One is, of course, intellectual merit, because you'll need to get into Stanford. That's the first gate that you have to clear. The other 2 are interesting insofar as they've become very clear in describing their aim to support individuals who are ambitious for others and can provide evidence of caring and serving and working toward problems and issues that have a very broad impact or will have a broad impact going forward. So that kind of idea of a civic mindset is important alongside intellectual merit and evidence and demonstrated leadership as well, which they define in a very open and individual sense. There's a lot of information on their website. The Scholars Program deadline is September 12th, and if you intend to apply to the Knight-Hennessy, you'll need to apply to an earlier Stanford deadline, depending on which program, degree program you're applying to for your graduate study. So just be aware that those deadlines are a tiny bit earlier than what your standard Stanford deadlines are going to be. Again, as with all these opportunities, you'll need letters of rec, transcripts, online portals, and then some pretty important essays that we are available to help you in crafting and thinking about across the summer. That takes us right to the end of the kind of awards that are most relevant, I think, to our recent alum. I'm going to put up our individual advising or individual email addresses, which would allow you to reach out specifically if you're interested in Fulbright. I would say especially Fulbright with Nick, because we're right in the midst of that process. And then UK Ireland, I'm happy to support anyone looking to next year to apply to that, or to Gates, Cambridge, and Knight-Hennessy this year. And then Nick and I are also available to chat with anyone about Schwarzman and Yinqing, which are also upcoming. I think that's it. Rachel, we're happy to start taking questions. I think we have a little bit of that.
Wonderful. A first question is around the ETA program with Fulbright. What can you say about, is there an age limit or a usual age people are when they apply?
Yeah, no, not really. There are a handful of countries, and it's sort of, again, country dependent. So us.fulbrightonline.org will ultimately be the first, last, and middle word on kind of the eligibility criteria. For the handful of countries that do actually explicitly state an age deadline, and there are not many, it's about 30. So there's not necessarily there's no like sort of age expectation, but it's really going to be about articulating how the experience is ultimately going to be kind of catalytic in your sort of your path forward. So that as long as this experience kind of makes coherent sense in what you plan on doing, it's really pretty viable at any age. I think they've featured very advanced student alumni who are sort of grantees who've gone through the ETA program. The sort of singular kind of eligibility, or not singular, but you cannot have completed a PhD. That would be the only thing that kind of throws the hiccup into age.
Another age question, is there an age requirement for the Cambridge Scholarship, the Schwarzman Scholarship, or the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program?
Yes, so the Knight-Hennessy Scholarship does have an expectation that you'll be applying within 4 years of receiving your bachelor's degree. The Gates Cambridge, generally it's 29 and under, although they're a little bit more flexible. The Schwarzman similarly has a kind of 29 and under, as does Yinqing, although they've dropped it to about 25. So they're giving a bigger window than the Marshall or the Rhodes. In fact, the Nichole as well has a little bit higher age expectations. So yeah, good question. The Knight-Hennessy, Schwarzman, Yinqing, and Gates have a slightly higher age limitation. And again, I think it's down to the fact that 2 things, I guess, is worth saying. We often get questions, well, as an alum, am I a good candidate? And in fact, the answer is absolutely yes, because There's a lot of lived experience that happens and a lot of development that occurs between kind of fourth year of undergraduate and a couple of years after. So I think the national fellowships are responding to that in a positive way and recognizing that more and more students are waiting to go back to pursue a graduate degree, and that's actually sound judgment, but that they've also benefited from some pretty important experiences out in the professional world or in the world of public service, gaining leadership skills and all those things that these awards very much value. And so alumni do make terrific candidates. At the end of the day as well, it might be a good idea to think about these as funding pipelines because the idea for all of them is to be able to argue that there is simply no better place for you to do your graduate degree than Oxford or Stanford or Queen's Belfast, and that you'd really like the support of the Nichole Scholars Program to pursue X degree. So I think the ability to speak, like Nick said, even about the ETA and the way that these experiences are fundamental in the next steps in your career and your academic training and what you want to do next is really the direction to go in approaching all of them.
There's a question, could you please speak to how alumni can successfully request or obtain letters of recommendation, particularly if they haven't maintained close relationships with professors since graduating a couple of years ago?
Do you like to take it? I'm going to give the A version.
Yeah. The sort of, I guess, without having had the continued prolonged contact with faculty, it would be a matter of restarting that relationship, being relatively forthright in your intentions, communicating what you've been up to since, and always kind of as you go through the process, kind of keeping them apprised of what you're producing so that they can tailor a letter to both the experiences that they might recall from your undergraduate experience to what you've done since, how your CV or resume will kind of be emphasized or reflected in your personal statements or anything else that you're producing for the application, and so that they can kind of basically exhortatively kind of champion your cause.
I think in some instances as well, where current undergraduates would be expected to have a lot of academic voices, be they research PIs or mentors or teaching faculty. There is a little bit of flexibility for those who have been recently or are recent alums graduated to include potentially employers or others who might be able to speak to any volunteerism or public service work. So that kind of blending of letters and types of letters becomes a little bit more flexible. I will say though that categorically there is not a single national fellowship that will not expect academic voices. So it's really important, especially those of you who graduated recently, to make sure that you continue to, as Nick said, keep those relationships going. I mean, it's true for any graduate school program. You will need academic letters coming to support you for, of course, being able to legitimately say you're ready for graduate school. An employer can't do that, and that is what the academic voices are there to, in fact, do, is to vouch for your potential for future success at the graduate level. So by all means, consider the alternatives in your professional lives, but do make sure that you're also renewing relationships, preserving existing ones, and thinking about other perhaps academic voices that can be brought into the mix.
There's a couple questions. So I guess sort of looking at all the programs we've talked about, are there specific fields people should be looking to go into, or are they really, you know, I know Stanford, you said that's very general, but looking at these opportunities, are there particular fields that are more likely to be funded?
So for Fulbright, it's been essentially pan-disciplinary. Everything is equal under the eyes of Fulbright, so no.
Yeah, and I would say for both the Knight-Hennessy as well as the British awards, equally it's open to any discipline. There is no specific preference. The Marshall has a few programs they will not fund, but apart from the kind of listed programs like a degree in management studies, they are open discipline awards. The Schwarzman is specific. They offer 4 tracks in the economics, business, international affairs, and policy. But even there, they are looking for students who, in fact, maybe didn't do that as an undergraduate and are looking to add on to their training by pursuing a one-year course in one of those kind of 4 areas. The Schwarzman also has a research or internship component where students will then excise and go further into their disciplinary interests. So we had a student 2 years ago very interested in environmental issues who was successful at securing a Schwarzman and pursued the public policy track under that particular award. Yenching is also kind of, I suppose, open discipline insofar as it lays into China and China studies. And so it's discipline specific insofar as it's focused on China as a place, but otherwise is also not necessarily targeting to the exclusion of other things, particular major discipline.
I have a question here about what can you share, what makes it, you've told us what's in a personal statement, but could you share a little bit more about what makes a successful personal statement?
Sure. To be frank, they're reflective, but they're not sort of navel gazing. They're very much still arguments that use the experiences in your life as sort of data points that you are sort of marshaling to say you could be the person you say you want to be. They're not binding contracts. There's a sort of nightmarish idea of being able to reduce the essential version of yourself to 1,000 words, and that's it's unpleasant to think about. So you're really trying to kind of represent yourself for this selection committee to make sense of how this opportunity is going to really kind of be of benefit to you, with the idea that you then are being of benefit to others.
In the kind of personal statement approach for things like the UK awards or Knight-Hennessy, which do take on a distinct flavor from any kind of statement that you would write specifically for your graduate program, they are looking for students to be able to, on some level, speak about what they care about and why, and then be able to tell the reader why they should care about that and why. And it becomes a kind of framing mechanism that ideally should allow a candidate to leverage and develop threads or themes of commitment, the kind of conviction that has driven decisions, that has compelled you to make particular choices in both your undergraduate education as well as all of the co-curricular and then professional experiences you've had, kind of leading up to this moment, this case that you're making for the graduate program, for joining an interdisciplinary community of scholars, for being in the UK, or even for taking on a Fulbright. So it isn't a kind of, let me tell you my entire life history, let me go back to age 12 when mom read Beatrix Potter and I fell in love with English. That is not the kind of person, I'm not sure there is a personal statement that goes on that vein, but there's a kind of tendency to think of it as a way of telling your whole life story, and that's just simply not the case. It is a kind of, actually in my experience, the most successful personal statements deal only in the most recent past, with some exception where there might have been something pretty powerful pre-college, and then really start to kind of take a view toward the future as a kind of purpose/proposal statement that does deal with next steps in light of the things that you've done up to this point. And also just say it's a show and not tell document. There's a tendency to kind of go abstract. This might be a UChicago problem, although I've been at other institutions where the challenge has been there too. This notion that you have to have some abstract idea of who you want to be, what you want to become, but in fact, the best thing to do is to show the reader the ways in which you started to really engage in those problems, study them, engage in service, make professional choices, learn languages, all the different ways you can kind of prove engagement, that you're showing and not telling about the things that you care about and why you care about them. I will say it's a hard document. I mean, I think that it's possible Nick and I were hired exclusively to support personal statement writing. And we do very much spend a lot of our time going over drafts and helping to kind of get that tone and that hybrid personal plus academic plus professional voice into that document so that it's successful, because it does function as the kind of heart of a lot of these application processes.
A lot of the programs you mentioned, you said they need a leadership or civic mindset. Could you give us an example of how we would demonstrate that in an application?
Well, let's see. Okay, in terms of Knight-Hennessy, an example I'll just pull from a previous scholar who spent a fair amount of time working in the South Side in a clinic environment and a youth kind of community health engagement project. She was very interested in health disparity and proposed eventually to go on to do a medical degree at Stanford. She also was able to provide evidence of kind of civic mindset caring for others in the work that she did in Nigeria. She was a global health research fellow and spent a lot of time working in a hospital there, looking at economic and health disparities. Two things kind of collided with issues around race. And so that was for her ability to kind of speak beyond just, I want to become a doctor, and actually be able to speak about this notion that in fact she could, I mean, this is a kind of cliche, perhaps it will be a cliche soon enough. Knight-Hennessy likes to use the language outcare others, and so it was a way for her to show that in her context, she was working with the individuals, the communities, and the problems that she cared about in a very real and substantive way. And that's one example, but you could, the students go in any number of other ways, through service, through running fuel divestment campaigns at UChicago, through raising awareness in any number of ways, public service. Nick,
yeah,
some ideas?
I mean, it's honestly about essentially having a vision that you are taking steps to enact and convince others of the validity and value therein, rather than succeeding at a challenging task that was set before you, or a brief but difficult obstacle. They're really looking for sustained engagement is another piece.
If people are looking for non-academic references, you've mentioned kind of briefly where they can pull those from, but do you have any areas that have been particularly successful in helping people receive these awards?
I think the maybe fundamental point with letters of recommendation is that they need to be from individuals who know you fairly well and can speak with relative detail about their engagement with you, whether that's in a professional setting, in a volunteer service leadership setting, or in an academic setting. So even academic letters, we hope and look for fairly in-depth, specific examples of engagement. So I think it's probably less an issue about, you know, in what kind of expressly environment they're coming from, and more what will they potentially contain. Of course, you won't see the letter, you shouldn't see the letter, you shouldn't be asked, nor should you agree to write your own letter, which can be a problem in the professional world. And in the case of any national award, you should very much be cautioned against accepting that responsibility, because of course, how can you write about yourself? I think that really kind of interrogating the people that you do spend time with, who you work with, is really important. I would also say it's important not to get hung up on their titles, or even the organizations for whom they work in all cases, because really, again, it's about what they can say about you, not some kind of hope that perhaps their name will be recognized by someone on the committee. That's a kind of myth, I think, that tends to persist. Although in some instances, if you do happen to know someone really well and they are also a senator, great. But again, it's the kind of where the world of national fellowships and folks who read these over and over again and every single year can spot a kind of either manufactured letter or one written by an aide or someone else and then signed by someone fairly easily. So I think, again, really thinking about the individuals who know you well in either an academic, professional, service or leadership environment is important. And that would be maybe the way I would approach thinking about who can write for you. I don't know if you have anything to offer.
No, I think that
is it. I think the one other thing maybe to make note of too, and it's something that we are all kind of in the mindset of when we're in an academic environment and dealing with an academic year, you'll want to make sure you're giving your letter writers plenty of time. At least 30 days is what we recommend. In fact, we encourage our students, current students, to plan quite a bit in advance, oftentimes because academics go away over the summer, so we're also dealing with managing their schedules. But it's really important that you're thoughtful and respectful of their time, and the more kind of warning and kind of guidance you can give them, the better. So I would encourage you to have an updated CV, have a description of the programs you're looking at, take them out for coffee, have a phone call, and kind of walk them through both your motivations, but also the programs that are interesting to you, so that they can, in fact, tailor those letters in a very particular way. The letters are very, very important. It's hard to overstate how significant letters are in these kinds of awards. It's one thing to write about yourself. It's another thing to have people vouch for what you've said about yourself in many ways, if that makes any sense, and to kind of be able to add to the complexity of your experiences and your training and your kind of case that you're making for future study or experience. And so those letters are really important and worth a lot of thinking. I think that's part of what Nick and I can help students do, is thinking about who should be your letter writers, what would work, what won't work. So part of the advising we do with every student, every candidate, is talking through letter writers and how to make sense and make the most of those relationships.
Before I decide to begin an application, can I reach out individually to have a conversation about whether I would make a strong candidate for a particular program?
Yes, absolutely. That's what we've got our email up there. You can send emails to either one of us, depending on the programs. We're happy to chat through. We both know enough about all these programs to be able to cover the details of most of them, all of them. I think what we would look forward to hearing more about is your own background and what your ambitions are, what you hope to accomplish, and we can go from there. So by all means, reach out by email. We can set up appointments.
You'll also see, if you're perusing the website, a link to what is now called Appointment Manager. If you're not familiar with that, and it's something that alumni can use as well to with your Chicago login.
If you still have it.
Yeah, to say.
If it's still active, you can use it.
To set appointments with us.
Yeah.
And alumni, if you've lost your Chicago login, you can contact the Alumni Association and we can help you usually get access again. So.
Great, that's good to know.
And the only other sort of like bigger picture question we get from alumni rather frequently is, does the endorsement process or application process or support we receive change in any way as like going from undergraduate to alumni? And the answer is no. Generally speaking, it just necessitates more Skype or phone calls, which we are very happy to do.
Yeah, and I think we both are committed to kind of creating processes and structures that will support alumni in the same way it supports the undergraduates. So in some cases we have calendars, draft deadlines, as Nick had outlined with Fulbright, that although we can be flexible with alum given work schedules and other commitments, we very much provide that framework because it's useful. And the idea is to make sure everybody's kind of writing across the summer, not procrastinating and doing all those things that can be tempting, especially for the personal statement. So we very much have alumni in mind as we're constructing processes that are aimed to support everyone. The one caveat being the UK awards that do require endorsement, and that is a much more formal process that alumni are expected to go through.
What, for each of these programs, what is the likelihood of someone being selected, and how many, what can you tell us about the number of people that have been accepted into these programs from Chicago?
So we can start with the baseline of they are very selective. Some of them, Schwarzman and Knight-Hennessy, are on the scale of they field between 38 and 4,200 applications for about 100 spots. So if you want to do that math, the Rhodes will field about 800, maybe 850 applications for 32 US spots. Fulbright overall fields 10,000 applications for about 2,200 spots, but the numbers vary widely based on whatever country or program you're applying into. Yenching.
Yeah, and equally Yenching is in the same vein fairly competitive because of the numbers that they field in terms of kind of campus nominations and then the awards that they give out. The second part of that question was to do with the competitiveness of Chicago candidates, and our students do very well. You can go onto our website for the kind of annual tracking of the national awards that have been received by UChicago students. We had a Knight-Hennessy Scholar last year, the first from UChicago in the inaugural class. And historically, we've had Rhodes Marshall Scholars, numbers of Fulbrights. We're among the top producers of Fulbright Scholars in the nation. 5th this year, 3rd last year. So that just really proves that our students are well prepared and have the moving parts necessary for success. I will say, though, that because these are so competitive, the time you put in to the application is really important. These are not awards you will get by applying 24 hours in advance, at least which being you won't have letters. But this is a different enterprise and one that does require time and energy. And part of our job is to make sure that that's well placed energy and time. So part of what we would want to talk with you about, again, is not just your ambitions, but also do you meet the criterion. I think always the first place to start, even before you speak with us, is to make sure you've read the mission statements, that you've gone onto the websites of these award programs, that they really do feel like something that you resonate with or that is the right kind of fit or will at least facilitate something that makes sense in light of what you want to do going forward. Because the kind of question, am I competitive, is really contingent on that big picture, not exclusively on the specifics of GPA and letters, and it all comes together around, does this make the most sense for me at this time in light of what I hope to do?
You mentioned the timeline and that I need to put a lot of time into this. Can you give me an understanding of how much time you would expect someone puts into one of these applications?
Let's start with yours.
Yeah, I mean, I've had, so if you can harken back to your school days, people correlated to, like if you're putting a full kind of effort in, something less than a full class, but a rather serious kind of weekly commitment. Yeah, I mean, I don't know total hours, but it's in the dozens.
Yeah, we did average out hours spent, more or less. It's hard to do that because there's a lot of time that goes in around interview preparation and kind of pre-application work. But for Knight-Hennessy and the UK awards, it's a hefty 40+ hours just dedicated to the writing, because these drafts and these essays require a lot of thought and a lot of drafts. So it's not, again, something that one should take lightly, but it's also not entirely different than what you'd be expected to do for graduate school. And I think it's probably safe to say you should anticipate this almost feeling on some level like a part-time job, at least for a short period of time, because anything perhaps worth doing does require a fair amount of time and investment, particularly in this instance, and then with graduate school applications as well. So that might not be a satisfactory answer, but that's what we've come to anticipate, and not to scare you off. Yeah,
and the definitely not to scare you off part is we've structured our application processes in a way that is designed to make them manageable, not the least of which because between like your 3rd and 4th personal statement draft, you're going to need to put it down for like 2 weeks. So it's, our processes are designed to make it accessible.
And spread across time, so that you're not kind of doing all this in the last 3 weeks before a deadline, but in fact using the bulk of the summer or a number of months to prepare for that.
And can you remind us one more time, it's already July, what we could apply for this year, what we should be looking for next year or in the future?
So Fulbright, we're very much in the swing of accepting applications or holding people into our process. So if you're interested in that, by all means, shoot me an email and we can kind of get rolling with what the rest of our campus process looks like.
And then I would say Knight-Hennessy and Schwarzman are still on deck. Be aware, Knight-Hennessy's deadline again is September 12th. Schwarzman's deadline is September 28th, so it's going to come up fairly soon, but absolutely alumni can pick up the process right now. Reach out to me and we can get you started on that. The Yenching is something that you can anticipate later on in the fall, so yes, by all means, we could be working with alum this year for Yenching. And then of the UK awards, the option you have is the Gates Cambridge, which has a deadline of mid-October, and I'd want to be talking with folks about options with Gates Cambridge this summer. So actually the majority of what we've spoken about with you today you have the opportunity to apply to yet this year to begin, again, as we've said, next year, generally speaking, the fall of 2019.
I would ask you, from myself as Rachel, what resources could people be looking to help? You've said to really go onto these programs and read the mission statements and their websites. Are there other resources you would recommend people could use to help prepare beyond just using your office?
No, use our office. No, but to be quite frank, our website is designed to be as comprehensive as possible, so that you could glean most of the information we would have in a sort of in-person conversation from it. It's a little bit more reading intensive and sort of clicking through, but it is all there in a way that should hopefully help contextualize most of A, the work that we do, and B, what is going to be expected of you.
And each of the programs that we've designed, you can obviously go out to their own websites, but each of them also has a dedicated page on our website that details the process that we engage in at the University of Chicago around these. So there's a kind of two-stage, perhaps interrogation of the information around each of these awards, both what we need students to be thinking about, and then also what the institutional or the foundation websites say. I would also just say kind of one word of caution, and that's to be very careful about any kind of searching you do on the internet for samples of personal statements, for successful applications and things like that. And even be a little careful. It's good always to kind of look at profiles, I suppose, to get a sense of what students are being selected, but even those are highly polished. Most fellowship candidates have some variation of a fellowship office or advisor or faculty that's helped them along the way. So I'd be careful in kind of thinking you can just Google successful Rhodes personal statement and find something that's actually useful. In fact, it may be more damaging than good. Using samples as a benchmark for your own writing can trip you up in more ways than one. So I'd really actually encourage you to kind of be careful about the kind of resources you might be drawing down from the internet. And I'm not even sure there are many books out there expressly dealing with these things because they're so individual that when it comes down to brass tacks and putting together an application, it's really about kind of what you're developing as opposed to what people are telling you exclusively to develop, if that makes sense. And that's why I think our office was created, because it very much is an individual advising and working with support systems as opposed to just pulling some samples together and using that as a benchmark. Caveat, Nick, have I overstated?
No,
okay.
No,
So as we're kind of moving towards the end of our time together, I would ask you both, how would you, in a minute or two, how would you sum up the most important thing people should take away from this presentation today?
that we exist and you should use us. To be perfectly frank, that we are a resource that is available to alumni, that these opportunities exist, and not only are you eligible for them, we are designed to help support your application.
Yeah, I absolutely echo that. I'll just say one other thing, that I think that there's some value in these processes that tie into how you're thinking about your own personal and professional development. So although personal statement takes a lot of work, it's possible there's no other time nor impetus for you to sit down and reflect thoughtfully and carefully and with intention about the things that you've done and the things that you hope to do going forward. And that has long-reaching impact into your professional life and obviously making good choices about graduate school, even in how you interview. Because if you take a moment and pause and think about questions like, what do you care about and why, and what gets you out of bed in the morning, and why do you keep doing the things you're doing, you're going to find that even speaking out loud about them becomes a little bit easier every time. So we talk a lot about the process and the value of the process because, of course, we can't guarantee the win, so to speak, and we're not actually entirely interested in that exclusively because that's almost a fool's errand given the kind of nature of these awards. What we can talk about as being successful is the ways in which you'll both open yourselves up to other opportunities. So a lot of the national award candidates will go on to be admitted to great graduate programs or secure other awards. So it's not a kind of end game so much as it is opening up to the opportunities and leveraging the different pieces of these applications to the best of your ability so that you're ready to make really interesting and important and good decisions going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nicole and Nick, so much for sharing these best practices, these resources, and letting us know that your office exists and that you are a resource for all UChicago alumni. I want to thank everyone that's joined us today for this webinar. I invite you to join us again this month for more programs to help build your career. Tomorrow, we'll be having a panel of alumni professionals who will share how they've leveraged networking for career success and how you can do that too. And you can join us again on July 19th to learn about public speaking in a presentation called From Boring to Brilliant, Crafting Presentations That Stand Out from the Crowd. Hope you'll join us again. Take care and have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.